The silent minds who never post, and why they're the hardest to read. They say silence means nothing, but psychology knows better. Because in a world addicted to sharing, the most dangerous minds are the ones who don't feel the need to be seen. This story isn't about loneliness. It's about control and the people who quietly took it back. Most people wake up and reach for their phone, not to check the time, but to check their value. Likes, views, messages, proof that they still exist in someone else's mind. But there are others, people who don't post, don't announce their wins, don't explain their pain, don't turn their life into content. And that silence, it terrifies people more than they realize, because silence removes leverage. Meet Elias. If you searched his name online, you'd find almost nothing. No stories. No daily updates, no emotional confessions disguised as captions. To most people, he seemed invisible. But invisibility was a choice. And psychology says, what you hide reveals more than what you show. People often assume those who don't post are insecure, shy, disconnected, afraid of judgment. But that's projection, because the truth is darker. People who don't post have already learned something others haven't. They learned that attention is a currency. And once you stop begging for it, you stop being controlled by it. Elias watched people carefully. He noticed how moods rose and fell with notifications, how confidence collapsed when engagement dropped, how arguments started over misinterpreted emojis, how people slowly trained themselves to think in captions instead of thoughts. And he stepped away. Not because he couldn't compete, but because he saw the cost. Psychology calls this internal validation dominance. It means your sense of self doesn't need witnesses. People like Elias don't ask, do they like me? They ask, do I respect myself? That shift alone changes how power works. Here's something unsettling. The more you post, the easier you are to predict. Your fears, your desires, your insecurities, your emotional patterns, all exposed, all archived, all usable. But people who stay silent, they remain unreadable. And the human brain hates uncertainty. That's why silence makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you feel about them. They don't know where they stand. And when people don't know where they stand, they lose control. Elias noticed something strange. The less he shared, the more people projected onto him. Some thought he was arrogant. Others thought he was broken. Some assumed he was hiding something. But none of them were right, because silence becomes a mirror. People don't see you, they see themselves. Psychology calls this projection anxiety. When information is missing, the mind fills the gap, and it rarely fills it with truth. Elias wasn't disconnected, he was present. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he reacted, thought more than he explained. And while others were busy performing their lives, he was building his. Quietly, there's another truth no one talks about. People who don't post often experienced one of two things early in life. They were either ignored or overexposed, and both teach the same lesson. Privacy equals safety. When you grow up learning that being seen can be dangerous, you learn to move silently, not weakly, strategically. And once the brain adapts to silence, noise loses its power. Social media rewards reaction, not reflection. It trains the mind to respond instantly, to explain itself, to justify emotions, to seek approval before trusting instinct. But silent minds, they delay reaction, and delayed reaction is where control lives. Elias didn't need to tell people he was strong. He didn't need to show progress photos. He didn't need validation comments. His confidence wasn't loud. It was grounded. And grounded confidence is the hardest to manipulate. Here's the psychological difference. People who post often ask, do you see me? People who don't post ask, do I see myself clearly? That single difference changes relationships, boundaries, and power dynamics. Notice this. People who overshare are easier to guilt. easier to pressure, easier to shame. Because once you explain yourself publicly, you hand others a script. But when you don't explain, you keep authority. Elias rarely explained himself, and it confused people. Why are you so private? What are you hiding? Don't you care what people think? He did care. He just refused to let it rule him. Psychology calls this emotional self-containment. It's not avoidance, it's regulation. It's the ability to feel deeply without leaking control. And here's the part that scares people the most. Silent minds are not passive. They are watching, learning, mapping behavior, noticing inconsistencies. And when they finally speak, it's intentional, not emotional. That's why people who don't post are often underestimated. Until they act, until they leave, until they succeed quietly, until they cut access without explanation. And suddenly, the same people who ignored them are desperate for answers. Silence delays gratification, and the brain that masters delay masters itself. That's why many silent people feel older than their age, calmer under pressure, less reactive to chaos. They've trained their nervous system not to perform. Elias once said something simple. Not everything needs an audience. Some things need understanding. That sentence alone explains everything. He wasn't antisocial. He was anti-extraction. He refused to let algorithms decide his worth, refused to let strangers shape his identity, refused to let validation replace self-trust. And that made him dangerous. Not loud dangerous, not aggressive dangerous, but mentally free dangerous. Because once you stop needing to be seen, no one can control you with attention. Once you stop needing approval, no one can manipulate you with rejection. Once you stop explaining yourself, no one can rewrite your story. So if you're one of the quiet ones, if you watch more than you post, think more than you speak, feel more than you show, psychology doesn't call you weak, it calls you unexploited. Because the loudest minds are often the easiest to control, and the silent ones, they already escaped.